And I'd like to thank Jack and the rest of the think tank team and all the work that they did to put this series together. I'm really proud to be the first one in the series. The way I'd like to do this is I'm going to talk I've got about a bit more than an hour of presentations, but we have 2 hours. So rather than waiting for questions at the end, just ask whenever you have a question. I think that's much better as we go along. And then we can also have discussion at the end as well. But feel really comfortable to ask any questions. Just raise your hand. I don't know if you have a microphone for people or I could just repeat the question. Okay, because I should be able to hear you. All right, so basically, what I'm going to talk to you about is why it's important that psychedelics be integrated into Western culture, even more so than ever before, and how strategically we're going to be doing that. And I'll tell a little bit about what motivated me in the first place to take this route with my life. And I think you'll be able to get a sense for the strategic importance of this in cultural human survival. So it's pretty lofty, but I think there's a lot to be said for that. What I want to do is just, of course, acknowledge that, as you heard, we've dispersed over $36 million over our history. I was pretty shocked when we added that up, because that's all donations, it's all nonprofit. And the best way to think about MAPS is as a nonprofit psychedelic and medical marijuana pharmaceutical company. So we are actually acting like a pharmaceutical company, trying to develop through the FDA certain kind of drug-assisted psychotherapies and also marijuana. And when I started MAPS in 1986, I didn't realize that no drug had ever been made into a medicine by a nonprofit. And that didn't happen until 1999. And that was the abortion pill, RU46. So that was a controversial drug that nobody else was willing to take. And it eventually was developed by the Rockefellers, the Buffetts, and the Pritzkers. So sort of left-wing wealthy families decided that this was something that they wanted to focus on. And that gave me a lot of encouragement that actually we could do the same. So I'm wanting to, thank everybody involved with MAPS. This is just a picture of some of our clinical research team and our investigators. We have a whole bunch of other staff as well in terms of our public education and communication teams and our fundraising teams and our social media teams and our operations. But it's a team effort. And really the person that I would say is most responsible for the renewal of psychedelics is not me, but it's Stan Grof, who I really learned from. Stanislav Grof, and he's 85 now, and he was a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist who did early research with LSD in the 50s and 60s. And then when the Russians moved in 68 to the Czech Republic, he came to the US. He escaped to the US and started working at Johns Hopkins for a couple of years until the crackdown happened. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is a reality check that we just had with the FDA that went well on the 29th of November. We had planned ahead of time to have media because for us, and one of the reasons I'm here is actually that the public education is more important than the science. The science is essential, but it's the public education that determines whether the science can be conducted or not. And so that's where we've so much emphasized public education. And so we arranged with the New York Times, we gave them an exclusive so they would report on the results of our meeting with the FDA. And for those of you that check the New York Times online, they have what they call their daily briefing, which is just a few little headlines of what the top topics are. So this was the daily briefing. Trump transition, Standing Rock, MDMA. The first two make you need the third. But for us to see it like this, it was pretty amazing that they elevated it that way. And the next day at the New York Times, they published this article also on the front page about the psilocybin research that a group, Hefter at USONA, that are groups that are developing psilocybin into prescription medicines as well. And this was for people that were cancer patients facing anxiety because of end-of-life issues. So in addition to the FDA reality check, we have this reality check. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you both is a therapeutic, scientific, and a political strategy and understanding of how we move forward. In anticipation of the election, and part of our efforts to sort of bring this to the mainstream, we had arranged to have a vigil on the Washington, D.C. Mall between the White House and the Washington Monument the weekend after the election. And so this is we call it catharsis, a vigil for healing. And we're getting pretty good at getting permission for stuff. This kind of amazed me, actually, because we had to do cathartic dancing to work through this healing process. So we had DJs, and we were able to dance all night till sunrise. And so this is the picture of sunrise. This was a women's rights holding the American flag over a jail cell, and that was our central symbol. And then this was the temple. This was sort of our Burning Man. This was done by the Burning Man community that we worked with, and the Dr. Bronner's company in Washington. And this was the temple that we built, where people can go inside and kind of. How many of you have been to Burning Man? Just a couple? Okay. There's the Burning Man, sort of, but there's the temple, which is where people go to kind of think about things that have, people that they've lost, that have died, mourning. It's more of a spiritual aspect to it. And so this was our temple, and we're just showing that Tibetan monks wandered by, some Muslim women in headscarves wandered by. And then these are the pictures of the actual burn that we had. And it was very cathartic. And so I regained my spirit for the struggles ahead. We also were able to do a march, a parade at sunrise. And we brought this art car from Burning Man. Here's our picture of the art car. So, and we had a police escort for all this. And I'm like, wow, okay. We can fight back. So how did I get involved in this, and why really do I care, and why should we all care? As I was growing up, when I had my bar mitzvah, this is from A Serious Man, the movie by the Coen brothers, which is fantastic if you haven't seen it. But the picture is the guy has just smoked pot in the bathroom before he has to read from the Torah. And he's kind of stumbling up, kind of spacey. But I'm showing this because I grew up and I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I really thought that the religious ritual of becoming a man would actually do something. I mean, I believed in the ritual, and it did not turn me into a man. And I remember sitting in bed the next morning thinking, I'm just the same. And then I thought, God must be busy. Must have been a lot of people who got bar mitzvahed that day. And eventually God will come around and something will happen to me. And after a week, I just gave up hope. It was just like, so I think the message is that a lot of the traditional religious rites of transformation and rites of passage have been drained of their power. And there's a lot of reasons why that's happened, but they don't seem to have the same compelling nature that they did maybe even 100 years ago. I think that's one of the reasons why there's such an interest in psychedelics and an interest in transformative festivals, so that people can have these kind of group and also individual experiences of transformation. So this was really the first clue in my life, in a sense, that something was missing. I grew up Jewish, and I have distant relatives killed in the Holocaust, and I got relatives in Israel, and so I was very much sort of second generation traumatized by the stories of the Holocaust. And it just helped me to understand that the kind of murderous rage and hatred and irrational prejudices are actually a threat for me. And I think I was very lucky to be born at the time that America was at its strongest, when my family was really doing pretty well, so that I felt protected enough to look at the trauma and decide that more importantly than learning about how to earn a living, to earn food or shelter, that the real danger to my life was this kind of prejudice coming around again. And so I just started thinking more and more about how this kind of irrational thinking, how it comes to the surface, and how people lose their rationality and let these kind of primitive emotions come to the surface. So I was just very traumatized by that. And then also I was a young boy at the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the time where the solution was to run underneath your desk, to duck and cover, and you'd be fine. You know, as long as you hid under your desk, the bombs could go off and the world could be obliterated, but, you know, you would come out and everything would be fine. But somehow we knew that wasn't really the case. And so not only was the worry about Jewish people or gypsies or others that Hitler went against, that could all come down to me, but now it's about the whole world obliterating itself in this kind of nuclear madness. And so I started thinking about the other. I got very interested in the other, and at that time the other was really Russia and the communists. So I studied Russian in high school, and in the summer of my junior year, my parents sent me to Russia for a whole summer to learn the language. And I ended up, my first underground activity, trading on the black market. I made a fortune. Those are Russian rubles and a Cuban cigar that I'm lighting with a Russian ruble. And my parents, I blame them because they gave me books to bring to the guys in the synagogue because religious books were forbidden at the time. So they sent me out to Russia on this errand to learn Russian, but also to kind of hook up with the guys at the synagogue, the people at the synagogue, which I managed to do, and I managed to donate all this money. I went to the synagogue in Moscow, and they said, we're being watched, you know, let's meet at a subway station at a certain time, at a certain day, and bring all the books and the money. And I was 16 years old, and I like, if they catch me, they'll just send me back to America. So this is kind of where my underground thing, but what really changed me was taking a walk with a Russian girl on the beach. And I was like, you know, where are the horns? Where's the tail? Where's the devil? You know, she was just like a friend. And that made me start to really question how we demonize others. That was really a big thing. And then as I was getting older into my, getting near to the end of high school, the Vietnam War was just actually escalating quite a lot. And so now I saw it's not just, you know, the Nazis being crazy, it's not just, you know, this whole conflict with Russia, but now it's my own country. I got to know much later Daniel Ellsberg, and he said one thing. He was the Pentagon Papers, and he said something that was very interesting to me. He said when he first started working at the National Security Council and started doing work on Vietnam, he started realizing that we were on the wrong side of the conflict. And then the further he got into it, it's not that we were on the wrong side, it's that we were the wrong person. We were the wrong side. We were doing it wrong. We were aligning with the dictators and the oppressors. So I started thinking, how am I going to respond to Vietnam? And I knew that Martin Luther King had done a speech on why it was important for civil rights leaders to speak out, for him at least, to speak out against the Vietnam War. But I didn't actually listen to the speech until on Monday, on Martin Luther King Day. And this is what he said. And he talked about, it's not just about civil rights, it's not just about Vietnam, but it's about a whole culture of values. And he said, a genuine revolution of values means in the final analysis that our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies. So again, it's not that you all blend into one global thing with no differentiation, but to preserve what's best with you individually, we need to think about mankind as a whole. He says, the call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all mankind. So this started giving me clues of a strategy of how to respond to all of this potential and actual destruction. Then I read this from Albert Einstein. The splitting of the atom has changed everything save our mode of thinking. and thus we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive. So the question is, what is this new manner of thinking? And then the more that I read, the more I started getting a better understanding. And so this was the UNESCO Charter. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So this is moving more and more towards psychology, towards understanding psychological processes. And this was also during the same decade of the moonshot. And Edgar Mitchell came back and said, when we see our fundamental unity with the processes of nature and the processes and the functioning of the universe, as I so vividly saw it from the Apollo spacecraft, the old ways of thinking and behaving will disappear. So again, this idea of this fundamental unity. So this happened to be the same time that I started taking LSD. And I started getting glimpses that that my bar mitzvah did not turn me into a man, but LSD had the chance to do that. And so here this is the, when I was just starting to do LSD in college. Now, it was very difficult for me, and suddenly I realized that the society was vastly overdeveloped intellectually and technologically and underdeveloped emotionally and spiritually. And that I was that as well. And that the whole idea of going to college had never been my idea. It was always a program from my parents. Not that it's a terrible thing that you're all in college, but that how many of you, have even questioned that you maybe could do another path, or I was just on that. And so taking the LSD, realizing that society was really imbalanced, and I was too, it made me think more and more that I needed to focus on my emotional maturity. And this was now 1972, after the massive backlash against the 60s and the rise of Nixon and just the beginning of the drug war. So I basically took 10 years out to get grounded, to do psychedelics in small doses, to get more mature, to get ready. But at 18, I decided that I was going to devote myself to psychedelic psychotherapy and to trying to bring back psychedelic research. It just felt like that was the strategy to deal with the world. And I had a really terrific situation with my parents where they were saying that you'll always have food and shelter. We're never going to let you starve. So I didn't have to get a normal job. I could survive without compromise, without doing anything for the world. And so I was thinking, okay, I'm sort of the product of multiple generations of refugees coming from Russia and Poland, coming to America, living the American dream, becoming successful, and then they were giving me the freedom to deal with deeper threats. And so I became very political, and this whole idea of this, the value of psychological change, the value of mysticism, it was confirmed for me in 1983 by Robert Mueller, and he was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And he wrote this book, New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And his central thesis was mysticism as the antidote to fundamentalism. He didn't quite phrase it like that, but that was he's saying, is that the mystical experience is the antidote to fundamentalism. You go from the books and the literal to the experiential, and then you realize that the books are an inadequate way, but the best we can, to describe what's formless and beyond words. And so if your book is a little bit different than somebody else's book, that's no reason to kill them. And that the mysticism is the sense of unity. So I wrote him a letter and I said, great book, but you didn't mention anything about psychedelics. And every new way of killing gets unlimited money, but new ways of peace are not really explored that much. And psychedelics are an important approach, and would you help? And to my utter surprise, he wrote me back. The Assistant Secretary General wrote me a handwritten note saying, I will help. You did understand my book. And he gave me a list of a bunch of different mystics in different religions. And I read between the lines. I heard him saying, send them MDMA, which was legal at the time. So I did. I sent a bunch of these people MDMA, and they took it in monasteries and religious services, and they reported back to Robert Mueller. And then he later helped me with the WHO, the World Health Organization, when they were trying to criminalize MDMA. But what I think really impressed him the most is I told him about the Good Friday experiment. So how many of you know about the Good Friday experiment? Okay, much of you, about less than half though. So basically, in the 50s and 60s, there was this understanding that psychedelics were helping people have these profound spiritual experiences. But the question was, are these sort of pseudo-religious? Are they really religious? Do psychedelics have this potential to catalyze religious experiences? And so Timothy Leary was the faculty sponsor. Walter Pankey was a minister and a doctor, and he was working on his PhD at Harvard. And they took 20 divinity students into church on Good Friday. I don't know if you know this, Mike, but it was Reverend Howard Thurman was the minister, Martin Luther King's mentor, because Martin Luther King got a PhD at Boston University, and he was the Boston University Chapel. And so what I felt in the middle 80s when I was an undergraduate again is that it was impossible to get permission for psychedelic research. But the most important thing about psychedelic research is not what happens when you're under the influence of psychedelics. It's what happens afterwards. Is there personality change? Is there growth? So I thought, here's a tremendous opportunity, because Walter Pankey died from a scuba diving accident in 1971. I'm convinced he would have done a long-term follow-up. And in the mystical spiritual literature, the way you evaluate a mystical experience is called the fruits test. What are the fruits of the experience? If it's really genuine, then it will be positive. So I decided I would track these people down, and eventually I found 19 out of the 20. And Walter Pankey decided to try to talk about the mystical experience in its abstract universal form. So even though this was Good Friday in a Christian setting with Christian divinity students, the questionnaire that he developed didn't say anything about Jesus. It said nothing about Christianity. It was more about these following factors. And these are the 6 criteria of a mystical experience. The first one is this sense of unity, either sort of internal with everything with your eyes closed or external throughout nature. That's the transcendence of time and space, the sense of sacredness, the sense of objective reality, a deeply felt positive mood, and a sense of ineffability, that you really can't describe it in words. And this was took him a year or two to review the world's literature on mystical experiences, and his main source was W.T. Stace, was a scholar of religion. And so he developed this questionnaire, and then I re-administered it 25 years later. Now keep in mind, when I'm re-administering it, it's during the Reagan era, with Nancy Reagan and the Just Say No escalation. The war on drugs is raging even more. And so if ever there was a time for people to disavow their experience, this was the time. So the main thing is, look at the bottom. On the left-hand side is the results from the people that got the psilocybin. So the one on the far left is originally, and then the ones in the parentheses are my 25-year follow-up. And 60 or above is considered to be a full mystical experience. Now, in the experiment itself, 9 out of the 20 people had a mystical experience, and 8 out of the 9 had psilocybin. So the experiment confirmed the thesis that psychedelics could catalyze a religious experience. So 25 years later, it's now 66.8% is what they say. And the control group was 11.8, now it's 12.2. So you could see these are almost identical after 25 years. So the important point here is that a lot of these people became ministers and had non-drug mystical experiences in addition to the one with psilocybin. And they felt that the non-drug experiences validated the drug experience, that they were similar, but they preferred the non-drug experience. And the reason was that it was less intense, that the drug experience also oscillated between periods of fear and thinking you're going crazy and losing control, and then you let go, and then you have this profound experience. The other experiences they had were more walking in nature, or making love, or some kind of unbidden experience that just comes on you. But they reaffirmed the value of the mystical, that it really was a mystical experience. But what I was more interested in was, how did that impact them? And so what they said was that it increased their acceptance of other religions and beliefs. It deepened their equanimity in the face of difficult life crises. It reduced their fear of dying, and it produced greater solidarity and identification with other genders. It was all men in this, foreign people, minorities, and nature.
Very few still. I mean, these were rare experiences that they had, so just a few. Yeah, like sort of, I wouldn't say overwhelming is not quite the word, but where it fills you that that's the main, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, all different ways. Occasionally, some of them did continue to use psychedelics, but they reported that they had these other kind of experiences to compare. Now, in the modern research that is taking place that took place at Johns Hopkins, people are getting psilocybin. They're not necessarily, they are doing a study right now with religious leaders from different religions with psilocybin. It's a tremendous, tremendous study. But they first began working with just healthy volunteers, and what they showed was that mystical experiences occasioned by the hallucinogen psilocybin lead to increases in the personality domain of openness. This is Catherine McLean. So what she was basically finding through these personality tests is you can take individuals out of a religious setting, out of a group setting, still they'll have these profound experiences that they consider mystical according to the same questionnaires, and that it has personality changes. And so this domain of openness, it's pretty remarkable because personality is not considered to be something that changes very much over your life. So the fact that one experience of a profound mystical nature can help people be more open was remarkable. So it's kind of a modern confirmation. Now, in addition to that, psychedelics, not just in terms of mysticism, but they also offer compassion and empathy. This was in July of this year. This is two Stanford neuroscientists published a paper in the journal Cell, which is one of the highest regarded scientific journals. And what they said was that MDMA is a probe and a treatment for social behaviors. This is Boris Heifetz and Rob Malenka at Stanford. And the first part of their paper, they said, here, we argue for the importance of using all the available tools of modern basic and clinical neuroscience research to map MDMA's mechanism of action in the brain. All the available tools of modern basic and clinical neuroscience. And the reason was the last two sentences of their paper. The world's populations need more compassion and empathy for one another. The study of MDMA provides one small but potentially important step towards reaching that goal. So to have neuroscientists who are not necessarily political, they're not even talking about therapy here. They're talking about the world needs more empathy and compassion, and MDMA can catalyze that. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is fundamental human rights. So we need to be able to explore our consciousness. You know, the Constitution gives us the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion. But all of those are based on the freedom of thought. And if we are not able to think to our full capacity, then we don't really have freedom of thought. And psychedelics can provide experiences that I think are fundamental human right for all of us if we choose to do that. This was an article that was by the Pritzker family, Nick and Susan Pritzker and their children, set up the Libra Foundation. So these are one of our donors. And this is the first articulation that has ever been in print from a funder about why it is that supporting. Now, the Libra Foundation is focused on human rights. That's the purpose of their foundation. And so this was an articulation of how funding clinical research with psychedelics links to their human rights agenda. Now, of course, human rights, it's a great argument, but it doesn't have a lot of political currency. But here's now the political strategy. So if you can check this chart, what this is from the Gallup poll going back to around 1968. So it's a long-term view up till just this year. The top line is the percentage of Americans who are against the legalization of marijuana. And the bottom line is the percentage of Americans who are in favor of the legalization of marijuana. And what you can see is that it started out pretty low. It grew during the 70s. Then we have Jimmy Carter, who got elected on a platform of decriminalization, but then the backlash started coming, and then it was only a few years later that Reagan got elected. So starting as like 77 is sort of the high point, and then there's about more than a 20-year period, of basically no change
I'll just show, so then right here is where things start changing. So what happened there? What happened there was medical marijuana, and starting in 1996 in California and Arizona, and then increasing and increasing. So what this proves to me and to many others who've looked at this is that legalization follows medicalization. That there's so much propaganda, there's so much fear built up about protecting your children, about marijuana causing schizophrenia, marijuana causing lung cancer, which it doesn't. But there's so much fear, and there's so much massive information that's being put out there by governments that have hundreds of millions of dollars for public education campaigns. How do you counteract that? And in America, fortunately, and the Western world, it's through science and through the media and through stories about medicalization. So the medicalization gives the opportunity to present a different view so that people can then modulate their fears and think more open. And so the more that medicalization gets spread, the more people are changing their minds about legalization. So in similar approach, the medicalization of psychedelics will eventually, I believe, lead to the legalization of psychedelics. So this is our strategy. Yeah.
It seems like the crisis surrounding opioids is now making Americans afraid of taking prescription medications, and that the typical path of medicalization to legalization might be getting cut off soon. How is that affecting?
Yeah, well, that's true. There's a lot of concern that the overprescription of opioids has led to this crisis of opiate overdoses. However, nobody is really saying, let's take the opiates off the market. It's a question of how should they be controlled. And the fundamental difference between psychedelics and opiates is that psychedelics as a medicine are never a take-home drug. They're always psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. They're always administered under direct supervision. So the idea that with opiates, those are take-home medicines, and then people share them or sell them or whatever. But psychedelics can be controlled, and that was a big part of my dissertation, was to show how psychedelics should be regulated to allay those exact concerns. So even, I think you could say that even in the midst of this concern about the opiate overdose, people recognize that there's more benefits than harms from the opiate medications. One of the big problems is the for-profit pharmaceutical companies that market to maximize profits. And so what I'll talk about a bit later, but I'll just say it now because of your question, is that we need a new model for marketing drugs. And the for-profit model, I think, is flawed because you've got to focus, legally, you have to focus on profit maximization. So if you have a company, minority shareholders can sue the management if they're not maximizing profits. And there's a new advance in capitalism called the benefit corporation, where what you maximize is social benefits, not profits. It's still for profit, you still pay taxes, but it's really about maximizing social benefits. And so MAPS has started a benefit corporation that has no investors except for one, which is the nonprofit. And that's what we're going to be using to sell MDMA, but we're not going to be doing it in a way to maximize profits. So I think that this still holds up, this idea that medicalization will change people's attitudes.
Yeah, I think there's an irony there too, because in certain patient populations, it's shown that this medical marijuana lowers opioid
Yeah.
doses.
Yeah, that's very true. There's been studies that we actually were involved with out in California with Dr. Donald Abrams, where people that are on opiates for pain, when you add marijuana, they get better pain control and they can reduce their amount of opiates. Yeah, yeah.
I was just wondering, another thing that happened in the 90s was the rave subculture emerged, which was had the same ethos as the 60s subculture. So I'm wondering how much of that also played a role in catalyzing changing views on marijuana and MDMA and psychedelics.
Well, yeah, I think that's true, but I think that the rave culture, the way it was portrayed to the mainstream was this is reckless, this is hedonism, and there was the unfortunate situation of people who are taking MDMA in rave settings, and there's more profit maximization on the part of the bars. They would shut off the water, and people would die from overheating. So
this actually made it more difficult for us to get FDA permission to do things because the MDMA became so stigmatized as part of this rave culture that, you know, the fear of ecstasy is what the National Institute on Drug Abuse wants to increase, and then they were trying to block the research into medicalization. Yeah, but I think you're right that the wave of MDMA back into the culture helped people to integrate prior difficult experiences with the more classic psychedelics, and it's an easier access to non-ordinary states of consciousness through MDMA. So I think that did have a good effect, and there's a lot of neuroscience professors and teachers who had early experiences with psychedelics is what prompted them to figure out. And in fact, most people don't realize that the work in the 50s with LSD is what helped us develop the whole understanding of neurotransmitters. Through the understanding the serotonin the neurotransmitters, how can something so tiny like LSD change consciousness? And it was because it had to modulate your own inner things, and that really led to understanding of neurotransmitters. All right, so this is a picture of me in 1982. This was in a week or two of when I discovered MDMA, so that's why I'm sharing this. This is at Esalen. This was, I managed to get college credit for this. Actually, I did a month-long workshop at Esalen with Stan Groff on the mystical quest, and I got off-campus study for it. This is Stan. So he's really, when the crackdown came in the 70s, a lot of the people that were interested in psychedelics thought that the path of least resistance is give up psychedelics and look at meditation, look at yoga, look at all these kind of non-drug alternatives. And what Stan did is he developed a method through hyperventilation that could produce experiences somewhat similar to psychedelics. And so he kept focused on this sort of cathartic experience and this sort of non-ordinary states. And so he really kept it alive. I actually took a workshop with him in 1972, and he was my main influence for why I decided to work in this area, reading his research. I was also influenced by Leo Zeff. Leo Zeff, we published a book called The Secret Chief. It's the leader of the underground psychedelic therapy movement. So as Sasha Shulgin was a chemist, he was looking for different drugs for psychotherapy. One of his students actually told him to look at MDMA, and Leo was the leader of the therapy group. So the things that Ann and Sasha Shulgin would come up with, those that they thought had therapeutic potential would go to Leo. And then, so he's the one that really in the late 70s into the 80s trained hundreds of psychiatrists and psychotherapists. And then I had a chance to do some work with Albert Hoffman. This is also, I got college credit for this in 83 in Davos, Switzerland. But I happened to be at not happened to be, but we started having meetings at Esalen on how to protect MDMA, because MDMA was ecstasy and it was called Adam. So Adam was the drug used in therapy settings and ecstasy was the drug used in party settings. And once it was clear that it was going to be used in party settings, obviously there was going to be a crackdown eventually. So we had these meetings at Esalen, and Albert came, and so we had Dave Nichols and Sasha Shulgin, myself, Albert Hoffman, and others. We all did MDMA together one night. It was Albert's first experience with MDMA, and what he said was, finally, something I can do with my wife, because she tried LSD once and didn't like it. It was kind of scary for her. So this is now the summer of '84. The person in the background is me there. This is me spying on the DEA. The DEA had decided to criminalize MDMA, and you have 30 days to file. They have to announce it in the Federal Register. You have 30 days to go ahead and protest. And we'd been preparing for years through all these mystics that we worked on with Robert Mueller and through psychiatrists, and we contacted all sorts of people. So, and we had pro bono lawyers, big DC law firms helping us. And so this is me right before I walked into the DEA and said, we're asking for a hearing. And they were taken totally by surprise. Then there started to be a bunch of media. This brother David Steindl-Rast, he said, a monk spends his whole life cultivating the same awakened attitude it gives you. This was the first public article about MDMA in Newsweek. And so we're breaking the stereotype. It's not just about ravers, so we get monks. Then we got Rabbi Zalman Schachter, and he said, you call the Sabbath a delight. MDMA is like the Sabbath at the end of a long week. and this was in the Washington Post. And so I felt like that we were focused on trying to preserve the medical use, but I felt that the criminalization was a bad idea. The prohibition itself was a bad idea. And so I would say that. I'd say even though we're suing the DEA to try to keep medical use, we're not trying to block it from being criminalized because we felt like we could never do that. But I would say it's a bad idea. So it was a delicate line. So I got called the Timothy Leary of the 80s. I was a Sarasota college student, became the Timothy Leary of the 80s. Wasn't the branding that I was looking for, but it was delicate. This was the Sunday magazine of the Miami Herald, so the Miami Tropic. And then we won the lawsuit against the DEA. The judge said it should be Schedule 3. But administrative law judge lawsuits, the administrative law judges give recommendations to the head of the agencies. They don't actually compel them to do anything. So the head of the agency rejected the recommendation. And once they do that, you can sue them on their logic. So then we took it out of the administrative law judge and moved it up into the appeals court. And then we won in the appeals court. The DEA was claiming that they had no ability to reschedule. It was only the FDA. And the law, the Controlled Substances Act, clearly says that they have that authority. So then the appeals court went it back to the DEA. They found some other reasons. We sued them again. We won a second time. Eventually, they figured out how to block MDMA from becoming a medical drug. And so in 1986 is when I started MAPS. April 8th, 1986 is the birthday of MAPS. And now, you know, for the first 7 years, I was the only staff person. Now we've got over 30 people, so we're expanding, and we're going to be expanding a lot more as we move to phase 3. This is just a bit of the organizational structure. So we have the Public Benefit Corporation, and they're the ones that do the research, and then we have MAPS and our various departments over there. This is a little bit more detailed of who all the people are, and this is the Public Benefit Corporation. This is just to give you a sense of how things have been growing. So this is our budget, our income, expenses, and net assets. The net assets is the green. They've gone way up. There's one of the tech people who 50% of the world's computer chips are made with software that he made, and he died at 62 and left us $5.5 million. Another person from Precious Moments, these figurines, these Catholic figurines. He was sort of a mismatch for his family. His family was sort of very fundamentally Christian, but he found his spirituality in psychedelics. He left and he became alcoholic with all these problems with his family. He died and left us $1.9 million. So we're moving in this area of developing the resources to go to phase 3, but you could see just the upward trend of what we're doing. We'll be spending down all the money, actually, as we make MDMA into a medicine. Now, we also had to deal with other cultural factors that came around as we started seeing the rise of the rave movement. So this was on MTV and Oprah. So this was MDMA causing holes in your brain. There actually was a young woman who had drug problems. She was went into treatment at a facility where her mother worked, and they worked with MTV, and they agreed that they would do a SPECT scan, which is blood flow in the brain, and they would show it to her live on TV as she's seeing her brain. This is a graphically manipulated image. It doesn't represent her brain at all, because what SPECT scan is blood flow in your brain, and they picked an arbitrary point, and they said any area that has blood flow of less than this, we're just going to show as a whole. And MTV was bad enough, but then Oprah picked it up. And there are still people today that talk about MDMA causing holes in the brain. And it completely this is the beginning of fake news. Not the beginning, actually, but just as an early example of fake news. And over time, we were able to try to change the images. So this was the first positive image. This was all the way into 2005. This is an Israeli, because we were doing studies in Israel as well. So this is an ecstasy pill actually being a lifesaver for somebody who's, it looks like kind of a military blood red sea with helicopters in the background, and he's being saved by ecstasy. And then this is one of my favorites. So this was Oprah atoning for the propaganda in the past. So O Magazine did a story on MDMA, And the the reporter contacted me, and we arranged for her to do an underground MDMA session, which she reported on in the article, really positively. It was like one sentence, this is illegal, but then the rest was just how it changed her for the better. And so this was the image that Oprah published with the article. Now, of course, this is propaganda in the other direction. You know, this is a magic pill, and all you needed is one pill, and they don't talk about psychotherapy, but, you know, this is a lot better for us than the holes in the brain. But cultural attitudes have been changing. This is where we're trying to get to, you know, an ecstasy pill with a psychiatrist's couch. And so we're talking about making MDMA into a medicine. Now, politically, it's important that these drugs, that psychedelics, help people that the American public mainstream really appreciates. So again, it's a political strategy of picking the patient population that will, so drug addicts are good, but they're often the other. And psychedelics can be very helpful in the treatment of addiction. The Native American Church uses peyote for alcoholism. But right now, and the way our culture is, it's really about the military and the veterans with PTSD. That's what we hear all the time about veterans with PTSD. And this was a tremendous opportunity for me. The person on the right is Richard Rockefeller. David Rockefeller is his father. He's no longer alive. He died in a plane crash. Senator Jay Rockefeller was his cousin, and Senator Jay Rockefeller was on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Richard was the chairman of the Board of Advisors of Doctors Without Borders. And he became aware of refugees in Serbia and Kosovo, and he's like, there are so many traumatized people in the world. There are not enough therapists, there are not enough psychiatrists. How are we going to deal with it? And so he contacted me, and he said, tell me more about MDMA. And so we started talking about that. And then he said, what's the hardest problem you've got? And I said, it's trying to build this relationship with the military. We've been trying since the late 80s with Vietnam vets, but the therapists and doctors want to work with us, but when we get to the political level, they all squash it. So we actually were able to have a meeting at the Pentagon with the Assistant Secretary of the Navy Surgeon General. And for me, I was a draft resistor. I was planning to go to jail for Vietnam, but they never caught me. I didn't run away. I did the absolute best possible strategy. I didn't realize at the time, which was, my thinking was to drain the system of the most energy and to realize how much we're co-opted into participating in things. And so I thought the very first thing you do is you register for the draft. And I said, okay, I'm not even going to register. They're going to have to come get me. And it turned out 60,000 people never registered for the draft, and nothing happened. So there's people shooting themselves in the foot, shooting themselves, you know, chopping off their fingers, running away to Canada. And if they had never sent in that first piece of paper, they would have just, nothing happened. And then that was a moral dilemma. You know, should I tell them about me? Because Martin Luther King also talked about civil disobedience, and you suffer the consequences, and you're an example to others. But then I decided strategically what I would rather do is create the positive alternative, trying to create these technologies of healing and spirituality. So for me, it was terrific to go into the Pentagon, and the shocker for me was that the Assistant Secretary of the Navy had been a classmate of mine 20 years before at the Kennedy School. And we'd been good friends, and we'd lost track. We had different career paths, but we reunited in the middle of the Pentagon, and he was very sympathetic. We had Lori Sutton. She contacted me in 2010. She is the highest-ranking psychiatrist in the military. She is a brigadier general, and she was in charge of the Defense Center of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury. And she said, when it comes to the health and well-being of those who serve, we should leave our politics at the door and not be afraid to follow the data. There's now an evidence base for this MDMA therapy and a plausible story about what may be going on in the brain to account for the effects. So she's our highest level military person that's openly advocating for MDMA research. She's no longer in the military. She's now the Commissioner for Veterans Affairs for the city of New York. Now, we're also trying to educate. We have our method based on psychedelic psychotherapy, based on Stan Groff's approach to LSD therapy. But there are other people that have developed non-drug psychotherapies for PTSD in the military. And so what we're doing is reaching out. John Crystal, who's head of psychiatry here at Yale, is part, and I'm coming back in March actually to speak at the National Center for PTSD here at Yale, where they're about to launch MDMA research and psilocybin research. So you should probably get somebody from here to come talk also. But they suggested that and this was again with the influence of Senator Rockefeller on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and they suggested that the first study that we do with VA-affiliated therapists was this one. It's with Candace Monson. She was in charge of women's health at the Boston VA, and it's MDMA-assisted cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy in dyads in which one member has post-traumatic stress. Basically, it's couples therapy, where one person has PTSD and it affects the relationship. And they thought that that would be a good place for us to start. So we are actually giving money to the Pentagon, giving money to the VA, or VA researchers, and saying to them, test MDMA and blend it with your method, just to see how it works. So we've already treated one dyad. We've got another company. It'll be 10 dyads. The study is looking great. And we have permission from the FDA, the DEA, and the IRB to give both members of the couple MDMA. So since Rick Strassman started psychedelic research in 1990 with a DMT study, all of the studies since then have only been one patient at a time. There's been no groups. So one of the things that we really want to explore is group therapy. And if you look at how peyote is administered in groups, ayahuasca is in groups, it will be more efficient in groups. Not everything should be done in groups. Sometimes it's so challenging for people to go through PTSD, or there's so much shame and embarrassment or fear that in some cases individual therapy is best, but we are now experimenting with 2 people getting MDMA at the same time. So this is a study that's underway, a study that's about to start. This is a woman, Barbara Rothbaum at Emory, and this is prolonged exposure. So this is there's about 3,500 therapists through the VA trained in prolonged exposure. And basically their theory is you talk about the trauma over and over and over and over again until you get desensitized to it. So it's kind of a deadening therapy. And it also re-traumatizes a lot of people because you start telling the story over and over and you're like constantly confronted with it. So it does work for some people, but it's really harsh. And so blending MDMA with it could really be more effective. So they've done a study in animals with MDMA and fear extinction. They're about to start a study with healthy volunteers with fear extinction, and then they're going to move into a study that we fund with MDMA combined with prolonged exposure. Now, we're also partnering with others, with Monica, who's here, for racial trauma. So it's basically PTSD connected to racial trauma that we're going to be working together. And then there's at UCSF for transgendered people who have PTSD from that. Now, none of these are part of our drug development plan directly in terms of efficacy, but all of these we will gather safety data. And the FDA wants us to have a bunch of safety data. So it's helpful for us as well. There's about to be a study in England for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for alcoholism. And in Switzerland, there's going to be one for depression. So we're training these therapists, we're supplying the MDMA, but they're getting other funding, and this will be something really beneficial, I think, to show that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy can be used for anything that psychotherapy is for.
What's the typical number of sessions there?
3. Right now, so we have basically a 3.5-month treatment program where it's more or less weekly non-drug psychotherapy, and once a month there's an MDMA session. And it's a male-female co-therapist team. So we're not looking to be as efficient, but we're looking to maximize therapeutic outcomes. So we have 2 therapists for every 1 patient. Then they have to spend the night in the treatment center, and it's something that we're finding very, very effective with only 3 sessions of MDMA. It really catalyzes a process. Yeah. So the therapy takes 3.5 months. 2 months after that is what's called the primary outcome measure, and that's what the data from the FDA will be, and then we track them for a year after that. Our first study, it took us a long time to do. I mean, again, because of the stigma, it took us a long time to get all the volunteers, get all the subjects, and so we waited till the end, and then we did a follow-up that was an average of 3.5 years. So what we found is that the results persist over time. It's not like this psychedelic afterglow and then things come back. Something can fundamentally be changed. Now, this is also here at Yale. This is Ben Comendi. This is what he's going to be doing is effects of MDMA on prefrontal and amygdala activation and PTSD. They're basically going to take people with PTSD, give them MDMA, stick them in an fMRI scanner, and minimal therapy around it. Not really even therapy, just support, and they're not trying to see if they can make these people better, but we will be doing outcome measures just to see. So in a way, this is a kind of a no therapy study to see what the drug does by itself. And this, they felt that this was a less controversial way to begin at Yale, and it's not to actually start doing drug development with patients, but do mechanism of action. We're also doing a study with MDMA for social anxiety in adults on the autism spectrum. This study is just finished. We got really good results. Here's a picture of the results. This is the Leibowitz Social Anxiety Scale. And as you can see, the people that are the lower line, the blue, and that's a 6-month follow-up. So there is something that really lasts over time. We're doing this study with MDMA for life-threatening illnesses, people who are anxious about dying. We also did a study with LSD in Switzerland, which was the first one in 40 years with LSD, also in people who are facing death. And there's a major effort with psilocybin to look at this as well. And then we're also looking at marijuana for PTSD. So this is really not because marijuana is necessarily a great drug for PTSD. There's a lot of people that use it, but marijuana is more a palliative treatment. It reduces the symptoms. It helps people not have nightmares. But if they stop taking it, the problems come back. So it's helpful, but it's not the opportunity usually for a cure. I mean, if some people might combine marijuana with psychotherapy, they might make more progress, but they just see this as a pharmacological drug. And the reason that we are so interested in it was because the politics is even more difficult to do marijuana research than to do psychedelic research, surprisingly. And the reason is because the U.S. government has a monopoly on the supply of legal DEA licensed marijuana. There's marijuana everywhere. I hope to find some. But there's a monopoly on DEA licensed marijuana that you can use in research. And they don't want to give it if you want to find benefits. So it took us 7 years to get this study started, and it's only because we did work in veterans. And so what we're doing is we're testing high THC, low CBD, low THC, high CBD, a mixture of both, and placebo. And this study, in Colorado, they sold $1 billion worth of marijuana last year. They made about $150 million in taxes, and they put out $9 million for research. So we got a $2.1 million grant from the state of Colorado for this study. But this is a protest that we're doing, trying to break the government monopoly on marijuana so that we can set up our own marijuana farm and then use that for our research. Because the government marijuana is for academic studies, but it's not for prescription use. So until the monopoly is broken, marijuana can never become a medicine in the U.S. federally. All right, so then that's a range of what we're doing. So what happened at our meeting? So when we present our data that we've been doing since 2000 in PTSD patients, you also have to present as if you are about to market the drug. So we're having what's called GMP MDMA manufactured. In 1985, I had a kilogram of MDMA made for $4,000. And that MDMA is so stable that we're still using it today in our research, 32 years later. And to get GMP MDMA, this is the facility that's actually where we're having it made. It's going to cost us $400,000 just for 1 kilogram. But if our work succeeds, this place can scale up. So these are our big visions for the future. And so we're getting the drug to the quality the FDA wants. The question then is safety. Now, we've talked about how people die at raves. People overheat and die at raves from hyperthermia. But that does not happen in clinical settings. So this is temperature. Temperature does go up a little bit. That's the range, but it's never a problem. And we give people electrolytes to drink, like Gatorade or something. So it's better from a harm reduction point of view to have fruit juice or Gatorade or something than water. So that's the temperature. This is the blood pressure. It does go up. This is systolic. This is the diastolic. It goes up, but it goes back down. So there's really no issue from temperature, blood pressure. We do screen people out that have heart problems, but now we're letting people in that have controlled hypertension if they do a stress test beforehand, because we didn't know how long the hypertension was uncontrolled. This just shows you the side effects that are reported. And the thing to look at is, on the left-hand side is MDMA. On the right-hand side is the placebo group. And in some cases, like anxiety during MDMA is higher in the placebo group than in the MDMA group. Jaw clenching, of course, is higher in the MDMA group. Decreased appetite, of course, is higher in the MDMA group. But then the longer-term things, fatigue, it's worse in the placebo group. Anxiety, worse in the placebo group. Depressed mood is the same. So you hear a lot about Suicide Tuesdays and people that have depleted their serotonin. And that's a combination of the MDMA and the context in which it's taken. But in a clinical setting, we do not see that. And these are the data to demonstrate that. And it's because we do the MDMA sessions in the day. People have their normal sleep. We make them stay at the treatment center overnight. And they have nothing to do the next day either. We do integrative psychotherapy the next day. And they can't even drive home. Somebody has to come. So they're very resting, focused, inner-focused, working on their problems, and there is no evidence of serotonergic depletion or problems. Yeah. Well, sometimes people have heard about how you should drink water so you don't overheat. Sometimes people drink too much water and they die from hyponatremia, from diluting your blood so much. A lot of times, actually, within 1 week, we had 2 women contact us and said that they did MDMA at raves. One woman, they both had memories of earlier sexual abuse. And one of them said, I was with a bunch of friends, we were out there to party, I started feeling this earlier problem, and I didn't want to tell anybody because they just wanted to have fun. And I felt like if I told them, it would bring everybody down. So I tried to stuff my feelings, and now it's months later and I feel worse. So one of the side effects is incompletely processed, challenging emotions. If you stuff it down, because the MDMA sort of brings stuff to the surface. And then that same week, another woman said, I went to a rave, I took MDMA, earlier rape came up, I was with some friends, I felt like we could talk about it. I went off into the corner, I talked about it for an hour, cried, and then I felt better, and then I went back to the party, and now I feel permanently better from that. So I'd say that one of the main side effects is this incompletely processed emotions, but there are other side effects that it depends how you interpret it. This was one of the more interesting experiences. I was working with someone who was a German doctor. This was before MDMA was illegal. We were experimenting, and his arm became paralyzed under the influence of MDMA. And the MDMA really opens up the mind-body connection. It's an incredible, for anybody who wants to study the mind-body connection and the way emotions can. So his arm became paralyzed, and we knew MDMA can't paralyze your arm. And it turned out that after a couple of hours, he started telling us this story about how he was a doctor, and his father was on life support, and the family had a meeting about what to do, and they decided that their father really wanted to die. He didn't want to be sustained by machines like that, and he was the one that had to pull the plug. And the problem for him was that he hated his father. And so this was all this complex thing. Did he kill his father? And so as he was working it out, that it was really his mother wanted it, everybody else wanted it, his father wanted it, he didn't really kill his father, his feelings came back into his arm. So sometimes people might think side effects are actual side effects when they're manifestations of emotional issues being expressed in the body. The key point is that it surfaces the emotions and it reduces the fear of difficult emotions. And so the whole idea of prolonged exposure, too, is that you bring things to the surface, and if you're not so scared of it, then you can process it. Because these PTSD, it's like the past is sort of trapped as if it's always happening. It always feels to people. They've not been able to really integrate it and place it in the past. So MDMA gives people the ability to look at traumatic experiences with reduction of fear with enhanced activity in the frontal cortex. So MDMA diminishes activity in the hippocampus and the amygdala, increases activity in the frontal cortex, and so you can bring memories to the surface. And people who've been traumatized under MDMA remember the trauma even better. They remember a lot of the incidents that were too painful that they suppressed. And then once it's out of your subconscious and you've processed it, then the emotional tag is this peaceful feeling, and it's in the past. And then the next time they think of it, it has the peaceful emotion attached to it, and that's how the healing, we think, takes place. So it's memory reconsolidation and fear extinction. And there is more research. After Richard Rockefeller died, his family funded research with a fellow, Bruce McEwen, who's a neuroscientist at Rockefeller University, and they're doing mechanism of action on fear extinction now in rats with MDMA. But that's how, I think the key point is that you feel safe when the emotions come up, and you can process them, whereas when the trauma was happening, it was too scary. Yeah.
Just regarding the deaths that occurred in the settings of MDMA.
Yeah.
It was not, I recall that post-mortem studies have shown that the majority of those are not actually MDMA. It's other synthetics.
Yes, that's true also. Yeah. There have been some that come from pure MDMA, though. So it's not fair to say this is all impurities, but the tragedy of the drug war is that people are looking, sellers are looking for things that are not technically illegal, and a lot of them are more dangerous than the drugs that are illegal. And they have effects in different quantities, and so when people take a pill and it doesn't do what they think it's going to do, then they take more and more. And then if they end up having one of these drugs that has a delayed effect, and then they've got an overdose. And so, it's very true that a lot of them are not MDMA. All right, so this is just the adverse events that have occurred. This is sometimes months later even, but it's very low. Nobody has ever attempted suicide from our studies. Nobody's ever, obviously, succeeded in suicide. Nobody's had to be involuntarily hospitalized or anything like that. So because we have a therapeutic framework that is very supportive and very extensive around the MDMA. Now, the concern about neurotoxicity is focused on serotonin mostly, and then the concern has been, what are the functional consequences? And there's stories about neurocognitive performance in ecstasy users that's not as good as neurocognitive performance in supposed match controls. So we've done neurocognitive studies in the people in our studies, before and after. And these are at the different doses. The left is baseline, the right is at this 2-month period, the primary outcome measure, and we show no change. So there's no evidence of functional consequences in terms of neurocognitive performance. We've manualized the psychotherapy so that it's something that is standardized. That's where we have this treatment program going on right now this week. We have 41 people from all over the world that we're training in this treatment method, and this is on our website. So if anybody wants to understand how we support people, and the key idea is that we are not the guides, that we have no idea. People's unconscious is the guide. You're the guide. We're the support. You know the territory. It's your life. Our job is to provide support. So it's a non-directive approach that follows the content as it comes up in this 8-hour session from the subjects as they're starting to talk about it. And people have all different routes of working through MDMA. Sometimes people go to the trauma. Sometimes people go to childhood. Sometimes people go to happy experiences. There's any number of different routes, and we believe there's some sort of we all know that if you hurt yourself, if you cut yourself, your body's going to heal. That there's this wisdom of the body that is towards healing. And we hypothesize that there's a wisdom of the psyche. And if we can provide a healing context, then that will be all that people need. So we know all these other techniques, but we're not actually saying, okay, now's the time for you to go back to your trauma. It's really directed by the person who's there. And that's the essence of the treatment manual. But this is up on our website on the MDMA page. This is just one of the groups that we've trained. This is the training program. We have an online course, the Part B, which is our week-long training, which is going on right now. We've trained over 100 people. Then we have home study assignments, and then we have another week-long, so basically 2 weeks. And then we'll evaluate as they start working in studies. We will be, everything's videotaped, and so we review the videotapes and give feedback back to the people about how they're doing with the manual. And then we also convinced the FDA that we really needed to give MDMA to the therapists as part of their training. So you would not go to a yoga teacher who'd never done yoga. You would not go to a meditation teacher who'd never meditated. But the only way we can give MDMA legally to therapists, because it's a Schedule I drug, is part of a protocol. So the FDA worked with us, and we developed a protocol, and we have brought in people from all over the world. And when we had this meeting with FDA on November 29th, they said, are you going to require all of the therapists who work on your study to do MDMA? And it was sort of like one of those trick questions that we thought about a lot and prepared for. And the answer was absolutely not, because we don't want to create a cult. We don't want to say, oh, you got to all do these drugs, and you all have to be willing to do that. So therapists, we will eventually let therapists train them, and they can offer this therapy without doing MDMA. But we would not hire them to work on our studies, but we would not prevent them from doing it. And I think that's important, to bring in skeptics, to bring in people who don't want to do MDMA but want to understand the method. So we're going to have 2 different diplomas. We're going to have one diploma. This was done for a TV show. I took a class at Harvard School of Public Health with the fellow Henry Wexler, and he was the one that introduced designated driving concept to America, and he did it through Hollywood, through TV shows and movies. You get all these characters, and somebody says, oh, I have to be the designated driver. And you just absorb it when it's part of a TV show. You don't even think about it, and that's how they did it. So this was for a TV show. They just wanted to have a psychedelic psychotherapy session, and they asked our graphic designer to create a diploma. So we created this. And then there'll be a diploma in rainbow colors for those people that have taken MDMA. So once you go to your doctor and you see, or your therapist, you'll see what kind of color their diploma is. These are our results. So the comparator dose, so everybody gets psychotherapy. Some people get no MDMA or low dose MDMA, and everybody else gets therapy plus full dose MDMA. So the therapy itself is 40 hours of therapy. And that's quite effective. So 23% of the people that go through the placebo group with 40 hours of therapy with a male-female team no longer meet criteria at the 1-year follow-up. It's pretty good. You add MDMA, and now it's more than twice as much, 55%. And then this is at the long-term follow-up, the 1 year later, all of them. Now, those people that are in the placebo group, if they want to, they can elect to go through the whole study again with open-label MDMA. And so this is everybody who went through MDMA, either earlier or later. 2/3 of them no longer have PTSD. These are chronic treatment-resistant PTSD patients who've had PTSD. The first study was an average of 19 years. So the fact that 2/3 of them no longer have PTSD, and the other third, a lot of them have reductions in symptoms. They still have PTSD, and if we would give them 4 or 5 sessions, they might do a lot better. We found that people who dissociate, are high on the dissociation scale, have a harder time getting back into their body, getting into their experiences, and it may take more sessions for those people. So this is tremendous results. This is more graphically to show you everybody. We don't have everybody at the 12-month follow-up, all their data yet. And then this is to disaggregate it. So the primary is the 2 months. That's where we have to get statistically significant findings for the FDA. That was after 2 sessions. The end of stage 1 is after 3 sessions. So we see a continual decline, but in both groups. And then at the end of stage 1 is the crossover, where those people in the blue line can take MDMA, and then they end up in the same place. And in terms of effect sizes, this is just 0.09, so we have a large effect size. SSRIs have an effect size of around 0.3, meaning the strength of the effect, pretty minimal. And this is absolutely remarkable from the point of view of the FDA. So we have several FDA consultants who have worked with us for like 20 years and have retired from the FDA, and now they're helping us. And they're like, This is remarkable. So that's why they're helping us. So we have a large effect size. The one thing that you might have heard, and you'll hear more when you talk to Steve Ross and some of the other people come about the psilocybin research, is that there's a correlation between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes for people that are anxious about dying, for alcoholics, for nicotine addicts. That was what was found in the 60s and 50s as well, that those people that reported this mystical experience did better than those people that didn't. And so what we're showing is that this is the same questionnaire, the States of Consciousness questionnaire, where I showed you the 6 criteria. On the left is the low doses, and they have a mean of 0.15, which is not very high on the scale. On the right-hand side is 0.46. That's the mean, and you can see the variance. So we had quite a few people that had a mystical experience. Around 1/3 of the high-dose people, of the full-dose people, had a mystical experience, according to the questionnaire. But what we showed is absolutely no correlation between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. So that's the fundamental difference between MDMA therapy and classic psychedelics. And this also explains why we have a non-directive approach. Because if we knew that the mystical experience was the key, then we would want people to have this mystical experience. So we don't steer it in this direction, although in sort of psilocybin LSD research, there are a lot of attempts to really help people have these profound unitive states. But this is the key thing. One of the things we learned is that the cause of the PTSD is irrelevant. So if it's war-related PTSD, if it's racial trauma, if it's sexual abuse, if it's adult rape and assault, once you stuck in PTSD, the treatment is the same regardless of the cause. That was really important because that means we can enroll everybody and all that who qualifies with PTSD, and our results will apply to everybody. We learned that the low doses, to our surprise, have an anti-therapeutic effect. So what that means is that they still got better, but the people that got therapy with an inactive placebo did, as I showed you, 2/3 of that group, some of those had low doses, but still they do pretty well. When you add MDMA in 25, 30, or 40 milligram doses, we thought it would help a little, but it actually activates people, but it doesn't make them feel peaceful. So they feel more uncomfortable because they're there to confront their trauma, but their fear has not been reduced. So this sort of screwed up the idea of low doses as the placebo control to do a double-blind study. And we established the safety, and we showed a medium to large effect size. This is all the places that we're planning sites where we're training people for a phase 3, because we could just do it in these few places where we have highly trained people, but the question is, how do you roll it out into society? How do you train more people? So we're going to be having all of these sites here, probably. We're negotiating with all these different people. We're probably going to have 460 subjects. We're going to need around 25 million. We already have about $11 million. And then this is the design of the phase 3 study that we're submitting to FDA early next week. So everybody gets screened. You get 3 prep sessions. And then you're either in the top, which is the MDMA group, or the bottom, which is the placebo group. There's 3 integrative psychotherapy sessions after each MDMA session, and then the 2-month follow-up. And then there'll be a 1-year follow-up also. And what we discovered from the phase 2, to our surprise, was that the 75 milligram, the medium dose group, actually did great. It did even better than the 125 for many people. And we think it's because they stayed grounded in their biography and they were able to talk more clearly about what their trauma was while they're feeling peaceful, whereas the other group had more spiritual experiences, a whole host of other things, which are helpful in a lot of ways, but not necessarily key to overcoming trauma. So we're going to give everybody 75 on the first, and then the therapist and the patient will decide, do we go up to 125? And then the third, they'll be similar. And the way our method is that after 2 hours, people get half the initial dose. And that doesn't really make it stronger, but it just extends the plateau so that we have a longer period, because we feel like the longer you spend in this state, the more productive it will be. And it's so much time and trouble to get people into these things so we only use 1 supplemental dose. We don't continue it, but that's the way we do the study. We're going to be doing an interim analysis, which is statistical, thing where you can take a look while the study is underway with the unblinded Data Safety Monitoring Board, and then you can adjust your sample size, which is legit. I didn't realize that, but it's tremendously helpful. Our original strategy to the FDA was that we're going to do 2 large-scale studies, and we thought we're not going to apply for breakthrough therapy. That's the best kind of program FDA has to expedite drug development. But after our meeting, we've revised it, and so we're going to do 1 large-scale study. If we get robust results, which means P equals 0.001, 1 in 1,000. If you can get results like that, they'll let you do 1 study instead of 2. And then we are applying for breakthrough therapy. This was what the New York Times wrote about. These are the outcomes. So the big question still is, we're proposing to use an inactive placebo as part of the control and not low-dose MDMA. And the FDA, I think, is leaning in that direction, but we'll know probably 3 months from now, where we're submitting for what's called special protocol assessment. We're gonna try for 1 phase 3 study with this interim analysis, but we're gonna try to do a backup safety study in case another study in case we need it in Europe. So there'll be 1 study in America, Israel, and Canada, and then a year later, another study throughout Europe. We are going to apply for breakthrough therapy. What the FDA said was that the effect size is so large that we can show efficacy with smaller numbers of subjects than they want to see in the safety database. So that's why we need more data from other studies. And it doesn't have to be in the same indication even. But we need to build up our safety database. So, for example, the study here at Yale, that'll be fMRI. That will count for our safety database if we get the raw data. So we're going to have to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 800. We're only going to have 450 or so in our phase 3 studies. But we already have 107. We're going to have 100 people that were therapists that we're giving MDMA to. So this shouldn't be that much of a problem. They don't need to be conducted by us. They can be all these other indications. And then the exciting part is called expanded access. And that's compassionate use. So, and this is bipartisan support. So just to talk politics for a second, I was, before the election, it was like 2 in the morning, I was stoned, I was watching TV, I was just flipping through the channels, and I came on C-SPAN, and it was the Republican National Convention Platform Committee. And they just started talking about marijuana. So they started talking about CBD, how they wanted to have state laws for CBD, for epilepsy, and it got voted down. But then the next thing they started talking about was right to try laws. And so the Republicans are very much wanting to make it so that patients can have access to drugs before they're approved. If you have a serious or life-threatening illness and other things have failed, you should be able to pay to get access to these drugs. And the pharmaceutical companies should be able to sell it to you at their cost. They can't sell it at a profit. So that passed. That was endorsed. So there's bipartisan support for expanded access. The FDA wants it so that we're going to build up our safety database. So starting in the summer of 2018, we're going to be training a bunch of people to work with PTSD patients. And the thing about expanded access is patients pay for the treatment themselves. So we don't even have to pay for it. We'll provide this to people that are suffering, but the only condition is that the phase 3 studies have to continue. You can't slow them down to try to sort of move it out into the marketplace in that way. So we're going to go for expanded access. January 20th, which is tomorrow, we'll either make that date or it'll be Monday or Tuesday that we're going to submit the protocol. We think by middle of April we should have this agreement with FDA. And then in June, we're going to initiate phase 3 studies. We're going to try to end up with prescription MDMA. Now, it's not going to be approved the way normal drugs are approved. Most drugs, once they're approved, anybody can prescribe them. I mean, any doctor can prescribe them for anything off-label. But the FDA has this risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, which permits them to approve riskier drugs with certain conditions. And so the conditions that they're going to apply are going to be that only prescribed by a certified therapist trained by the sponsor. So only people that we have trained will be able to prescribe it, and it will only be in certain kind of clinics, which will be minimal regulations, but it has to be a comfortable situation. And people won't be able to drive for basically 2 days after they take it. Whether we have to do the things below the line is still negotiation, but we might not have to impose a lifetime limit, centralized pharmacy, but this is the things that they have for thalidomide. So you may have heard about thalidomide, which was used for morning sickness and it caused birth defects. And so the FDA, the only person at the FDA that ever won a Presidential Medal of Honor was the woman, Frances Kelsey, who blocked thalidomide from coming to market in the United States. So the FDA sort of realized, this was in the early 60s, that they were rewarded for preventing risky drugs coming onto the market. Thalidomide is now a medicine, and it's for certain kinds of cancers and leprosy, because it constricts blood vessels. But they want to make sure it never gets to a pregnant woman. So they have this patient registry, there's education requirements. So it was really around thalidomide, which was the quintessential bad drug, that they developed these programs. And as I mentioned before, we're going to sell it through a public benefit corporation, which is going to be owned by MAPS. And we have to develop our own ethical standards, so we're working with people at UPenn to do this. There'll be these psychedelic therapy clinics. This is the one I'd like to work in one day. And then how does this really move from medicalization to legalization? So this is near the end of my talk. This is how I'll say, is that there will be these other contexts other than medicine that people are going to be able to get access, social clubs, coffee houses, festivals. But how do we actually do that? And I think it's going to be done through these licenses. So that right now, if you're a drunk driver and you go out and you kill somebody, you lose your driver's license, but you can still buy alcohol. And a lot of times drunk drivers kill other people even after they've lost their driver's license. So in the age of credit cards and instantaneous approvals or denials of your credit limits, I think we should end up tightening how we deal with alcohol, and there should be a license to do drugs. And they shouldn't be that hard to get, but for psychedelics, you go to a psychedelic clinic, you have, taxpayers have paid for this, you could say, I want to sign up for an LSD trip. And you go and you get your LSD trip, and you don't totally freak out, you know what it is, then you get a license, you can buy it and do it on your own. And you can do it at a festival, or you can do it anywhere you want. And if you misbehave, you get your license taken away. There'll still be a black market, but it'll be much, much smaller, and I think this is the doorway. So psychedelic medicine, psychedelic clinics, psychedelic sites of initiation, and then psychedelic licenses will lead to legalization. And another of our projects is called the Zendo Project. And so what we're doing at Burning Man and other festivals is we do psychedelic harm reduction for people that have difficult trips. So mostly now, if you have a difficult trip, people don't use the word difficult. They say, oh, this is bad. And then if they get, out of control, the normal medical staff will just tranquilize them, or the police will arrest them. So we're trying to say there's a different model, and difficult is not the same as bad. These are our principles. Create a safe space. We're sitting, not guiding. I explained that. You talk through, not talk down. You help people look at their problems. You don't run away from them. And by asking them about what's bothering them, that gives them the confidence. You can handle it, they can look at it, and then they can process it. And the key concept is difficult is not the same as bad. And we teach a lot of people about this. We had 200 volunteers at Burning Man last year. If any of you do want to come and volunteer, we have 24-hour care for people. We have 2 sites. And this was the first year that Burning Man felt comfortable enough to put something about Zendo in everybody's greeter package. So over 70,000 people got it, and everybody relaxed. So just the same way that there's a medical team in case you hurt yourself, even if you don't need it, everybody relaxes. To know there's a psychedelic harm reduction center, if you're tripping and you get out of control, you can. So it reduces the fear and paranoia level from everybody at the festival. All right, so that's the plan. So this is sort of what just happened. So are we going to return to prohibitionist policies? So this is Jeff Sessions. Amazing that he might be the Attorney General. But here's what he said. We need grown-ups in charge in Washington to say marijuana is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized. It ought not to be minimized, that it's in fact a very real danger. This drug is dangerous. You cannot play with it. It is not funny. It is not something to laugh about. And to send that message with clarity that good people don't smoke marijuana. So, Kevin Sabet, who is the head of the leading organization, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, to oppose legalization and oppose medicalization, he said, if I were betting on the prospects for marijuana legalization, I'd be shorting. He's not so optimistic, and he's in his element now. He's super happy. But look at this. This is the 9 states where marijuana was on the ballot, either for legalization, for recreational at the top, or medical at the bottom. And in 6 out of the 9 states, marijuana got more votes than Trump. And in 2 states, in Arizona there and North Dakota, it was almost exactly the same. It was only in Arkansas where Trump got significantly more. But I think that this is going to make them reluctant. So the Republicans are very much on states' rights, destroy the federal government. It's all about the states. So for them to start squashing marijuana legalization in the states is kind of unlikely. Plus, there's a lot of support. The other thing that really came to me after the election was when you look at this idea of, you talk about opiate overdoses and all of that. So there are a large number of what are being called despair deaths, deaths from alcoholism, opiate addiction, and suicide. And if you chart the counties, most of them are rural and also inner cities though too, you look at where the despair deaths are taking place, they tend to be more voting for Trump. So to those without a college degree, the economy has been increasingly miserable. This may explain why some have turned to self-destructive behaviors. So this was true in the primary. So this is a March 4th article. And this is the data on which it's based. So if you look on the left, the mortality rate, so the mortality rate for African Americans is going way down. The mortality rate for Hispanics is going down, but the mortality rate for whites is going up. But when you disaggregate that for college or non-college, you see that the mortality rates for no college is more than doubling, and the mortality rates for some college or more than college, more than just college, or I mean graduating or more is going down, some college staying the same. So what is going on with middle-aged whites with the death rate going up? And that's alcohol abuse, suicides, and opiate epidemics. This is the chart that shows the relationship between, now this is the election, this is not the primary. This demonstrates that there is a relationship, a significant positive relationship between drug, alcohol, and suicide mortality rate and Trump vote over performance. So from a political strategy, what that means is Ibogaine from the psychedelic community. What can we do about that? Ibogaine is a psychedelic drug. It's really helpful for opiate addiction, and it can spiritualize people. So we're trying to figure out how to move forward with Ibogaine research. Now, this was something that President Obama said. I guess I can say that. He's still President Obama for one more day. People didn't see, now he's talking, this is an article in November of last year, New Yorker. People didn't see me coming, Obama said. In southern Illinois, at those counties I won, I was at VFWs and fish fries, hearing people's stories, talking to folks so that they knew me. They weren't getting me through Fox or Rush Limbaugh or Breitbart or Red State. So that means we need to go to those places and educate people about psychedelics. One of the vets in our study just published a story on redstate.com. I cannot emphasize how much this treatment changed my life. I went from constant daily suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression to almost nothing. The best part was this was not lifelong treatment and medication. So there we are in Red State. This was 6 minutes on Fox News the day after we had the FDA meeting. It was fantastic. It was, again, all about veterans. This was December 22nd in Stars and Stripes, which is the military magazine. This was front page. You can't quite tell, but this was front page, and then inside, all of page 6 and part of page 7. And then this is politically what we had hoped to do to amend the RAVE Act, because right now the RAVE Act criminalizes harm reduction. And so a lot of festival organizers have been reluctant to do that because that means you know drug use is taking place, and this grew out of the crack house statutes. And so they just applied it to raves. So it's been very frustrating because Tim Kaine, who is Hillary Clinton's vice president, Jill, Vice President, he's been helpful in trying to amend the RAVE Act. Just to clarify, harm reduction is not cause for prosecution. This was where we were at in Burning Man. So this is trying to bring our Burning Man self to Washington. This was me bringing my Washington self to Burning Man. This is for a documentary, and they had the idea. And then what can you all do, and we're going to be doing this later tonight, is the global psychedelic dinners. Basically, look at social change movements that have really succeeded. Particularly, we talk about gay marriage and gay rights. It's because gay people have stepped up and come out of the closet. And so psychedelic users, we need to come out of the closet. If people knew who actually was doing psychedelics and what contributions they made to society, they'd be shocked. But people don't say that. So the psychedelic dinners are this way to get people together, tell stories about your own psychedelic experiences, positive or negative, and then get some practice, and then doing this in less sympathetic environments. We've had psychedelic dinners all over the world, helping us raise money for MDMA. This is just a picture of one of them. And we're going to have the largest conference on psychedelics that's in America that's ever happened in April, from the 19th to the 24th in Oakland. And we're bringing all the psychedelic researchers from around the world. The last time we did this was 2013, and we did it before in 2010. We're going to videotape all the talks. We'll have 3 concurrent sessions. So if you can't come, you can always watch all the talks on videotape for free. We just did get scholarships from George Soros's Open Society Foundation. We just got $25,000 for scholarships. Half of it is going to be distributed through SSDP. So for the campus SSDP chapters, they have this, what they call the chapter activity tracker, the CAT system, and so there'll be a competition for SSDP students. So who gets free tickets and free hotels at the conference. So check that out. And this is the last slide I just want to end on. And this was one of the firefighters who was in our study. He said, "Before my treatment, PTSD was an island on which I was stranded. I now attend weddings, birthdays, church, and even go to the grocery store without panic, finally feeling connected to my life and my family again. Let's make MDMA into a legal medicine." Thank you.